Hello and welcome to the World Music Podcast. I'm your host, Will Marsh. Today I'm excited to share my interview with Steve Gorn. Steve is a celebrated flutist and Hindustani Bansuri player who has been featured on Grammy-winning records and worked with a wide array of artists such as Paul Simon, Glen Velez, Jack DeJohnette, Paul Winter, Krishna, Richie Havens, and many more. And I'd like to acknowledge Steve as really being one of the earlier musicians from the West to study deeply in the Hindustani tradition and continue to perform and share that music in the West. In this interview, Steve shares his amazing insight and perspective on life and music. This interview was originally recorded on September 30th, 2020. Enjoy. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm really thrilled and honored to have Steve Gorn as my musical guest today. And Steve, where are you tuning in from today?
I'm in the Hudson Valley in New York, Rosendale, New York, just a minute from Woodstock. That's a reference point that people usually know. Green, lush, fall colors all around. Quite something.
I'd like to begin by just asking, what were your earliest music memories, and was it a part of your household growing up, and where did that spark for music start?
The spark for music just came from the beginning. My dad was a concert pianist. I grew up in a household that was really drenched in Western classical music. I can instantly hear Brahms' symphonies in my ear. My father's piano playing while I was just a kid building erector set models under a grand piano. So it's always been there. I would say that in middle school, I'd taken up clarinet, and I quickly got on to saxophone and really took a dive into the jazz of the late 50s and early 60s. So this is really the post-bebop era where Sonny Rollins, John Coltrane, these were my musical heroes. And I really, I was totally immersed in that music through high school, through college. And it was while I was in college, and actually it was around that time that John Coltrane and Yusef Lateef and Charles Lloyd, who I had some personal interactions with, all became fascinated with what was going on with Indian music. Not only Indian music, but world music in general. There was a movement in not the full jazz scene, but among many jazz musicians to embrace the melodic structures of Indian music, the rhythmic structures of Indian and African, the modal structures of Middle Eastern music. And this was really beginning to be the ground of an exploration that I just went for. I just followed it. And it led me to India in 1969, backpack hippie, clueless, but...
How old were you?
25.
Wow.
25, yeah. And that journey just opened up a path for me. I stumbled around, as so many people did, studying casually, one teacher and then another. And even initially, I wanted to play the Shehnai, which is the double reed kind of wild oboe of India, largely because Coltrane had really been fascinated with Shehnai music, it being a horn, and I suspect that was really one of his main influences on what he began to do modally, particularly with the soprano saxophone. But over a course of a couple of months and some traveling around, I began to work with the Bansuri bamboo flute. And that became my instrument. And through a series of happenstance, total accidents, and bizarre circumstances, which I think anyone who spent some time in India knows that the unexpected is often where the magic is. I found myself in Calcutta and was led to a guru, a master of the Bansuri, Pandit Gurgaswami, who was a disciple of Pannalal Ghosh, who in the Indian music world was the man who took the bamboo flute, which was really the small folk flute associated with the mythology of Krishna, used in folk music, used to accompany dance. But Pannalal Ghosh, coming from what's now Bangladesh, began to work with these large pieces of bamboo and created an instrument where he felt he could really dig into the nuances that Indian vocal music was all about. And that was the style that I just fell into and loved and still love today. And it's become the root of my music in that sense.
Wow. So Bansuri, maybe you can share a little bit more about the kind of history of Bansuri as a Hindustani classical instrument. And from what I hear, it hasn't really been that long that it was considered one of the main instruments of the classical repertoire. Is that correct?
Well, that's absolutely correct. And what I think I was saying was that before Pannalal Ghosh, the flute was really thought of completely as something for light music in India, which would be folk music, bhajans, spiritual music, but not Indian classical music. It certainly was not in the, it wasn't accepted as an instrument that could really give the nuances of Indian classical music, which was really in the hands of either vocalists or the sitar sarod traditions. So Pannalal Ghosh, in a way, had to break that attitude. And in some ways, there were many people who didn't feel he did. But flute and Shehnai, with Bismillah Khan Saab, similar situation, entered the arena of classical music. To many people, indeed, it can capture the nuance. And to others it can't. Much more connected to vocal music than, as you know, as a sitar player, the percussive nature of plucking strings is not something that was really something that Pannalal Ghosh was trying to emulate. He was more into the kind of sliding mir and what's called gayaki, the vocal style, which of course is, there are sitarists like Vilayat Khan Saab who will say, I'm playing sitar in a gayaki tradition. In fact, I think every Indian musician will say vocal music is my core, and I'm using my instrument to extend vocal techniques, which is something we could, that I could say more about with regard to flute. But that's kind of where it stands. And then with Bansuri, things began to shift with the great Hari Prasad Trasiya, who living today is the certainly the most well-known flutist, and he adopted a style which incorporated more of the percussive aspect of the music in terms of the forms he played. And I think also he had a lot of interest in Western flute players and began to use double tonguing techniques that are second nature to a Western flute player, and allow that to be part of his display of the music. And within the Bansuri world, there are kind of two camps about that. I mean, there are the people that lean towards Hari Prasad as being a more complete exponent of Indian classical music, and those that feel that this more pure vocal approach is the real deal. But there's never any agreement in Indian music. You know that.
In all of human
you never
affairs. Every realm has its politics.
Yeah.
But wow, thank you for sharing that. I feel like a lot of people, I recently didn't really know that Bansuri kind of came on a little later from
Oh
Panal
yeah.
Ghosh, because I'm trained in the Mahar Gharana originally, and he was a student of Alauddin Khansab.
Well, that's the now. Here's an irony. I mean, we're getting into more of the intricacies and inexplainable things about Indian music, because Panala Ghosh was indeed a student of Alauddin Khansab and is part of the Mahar tradition. But then again, so is Hari Prasad through Annapurna Devi.
The individual expression is, always going to be.
Yeah. But I feel that with the genius of Alauddin Khansab was that when you think of all of the students in the Mahar tradition and the diversity of the way they manifest the music, I mean, Nikhil Banerjee and Ravi Shankar are playing the same instrument, but yes, they're coming from the same tradition, and yet each of them manifested a personal authenticity in the way they treated that music and the aesthetic of what they wanted to work with.
Yeah, you're touching on a really beautiful part of the music is there's always that individual expressive quality that comes through, even if you have the same guru, and that's part of the living and breathing, timeless qualities to me of Hindustani music, Raga music, is that it's every person will unfold it unique to their own.
I think that's a really important aspect, and I believe a guru has the role of transmitting something, enlivening something, and then I believe a guru also has the. I would think that the guru would want you to find your own authentic voice. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not like you learn initially. You learn, as I'm sure you know, in the oral tradition. You listen and you imitate, and that's the way we learn this music. But at a certain point, one has to, through just the process of riyaz, practice, and just some kind of personal ripening, maturing, one has to find one's own voice with the instrument. Otherwise, it's a lot of Indian musicians will actually use the term. They'll say, "Well, that was rather bookish." It was bookish. Yes, it was correct, but it was bookish. It didn't have that. You know, I want to get goosebumps when I hear you play the ga in Gushari Todi. You know, and it's got to come from your own personal integration with that, as well as a tradition.
Right. Steve, how many years have you been studying Hindustani classical music for? Looking around here or there.
I think I really started in 1971. So we're talking 51 years.
Wow. And I mean, that's amazing. And I'm wondering if you could attempt to kind of summarize some of the points of the things that shifted for you on the decade marks. For example, in the first 10 years, like what was something that you focused on and kind of overcame or learned? And then after 20 years, and then 30, because I'm 15 and I'm like seeing so much that happens. Like I shift my perspective, and
great.
I had a time where I was so fascinated by all the ragas, and I got to learn. You know, they're all so enticing and beautiful and unique. And now I just want to focus on one rag for a year and like really deep into it. And so this is a pretty, extensive question, but if you could, maybe look at the decade marks as
I really beautiful. Can. It's interesting because my son just turned 30 this weekend. And when I wrote to him, he's out in the West Coast. When I wrote to him, I said, when I was 30, my daughter, who's obviously older, was 1 year old. And I had just been back from 2.5 years in India. So, and what I wrote was that my hold on the music was so fragile. It was so fragile. And I can remember those days of waking up and feeling it's all just going to disappear. It's going to disappear in the air. Nothing is really tangible. Yeah, I have notes. This raga is sa re ma pa, but I felt so vulnerable to losing what had been kind of poured into me intensely in really only about a year and a half. I mean, it was a very short time, really, that I had with Gurgashwami. And actually, it was what I'm describing was when we came back from India in 1972. It was before my daughter was born. That's when I really had this fragile feeling. And then a very interesting thing happened. I had, among other ragas, I had really fallen in love with Rag Bhagashri. And we were living in Boston at that time, and I was just playing Bhagashri day and night, and I was really into my Bhagashri. Now, remind you, I'm alone. I'm on my own, and I'm just playing Bhagashri. And then in 1974, I went back to India, and I kind of just so excited to kind of march into my guru's music room, and well, what have you been doing? I said, well, I've been playing Bhagashri. Well, let's for me. I started playing Bhagashri, and nobody had the slightest idea what I was playing. I had on my own transformed it into my own Bhagashri.
Wow.
But I had no reference point of what's the middle road of you're actually playing Bhagashri, or are you just messing around with that scale? I mean, it was like they were all going, oh yes. What exactly are you doing?
Wow.
Or maybe I probably didn't say I was playing Bhagashri. I just started playing. And of course, to me, it was clear as day. Is it this? Is it that? What's he doing?
Wow.
And I think it was a wonderful moment that I can look back on of how in a way, how subtle and intangible that oral tradition really is. And I think the more you study the music, the more you realize how subtle it is. You don't just go, oh yeah, I get it. In a Western intellectual way. I get it. Yeah, I play this. Yeah, I do this. I know that raga. And that over the years, I guess 5 or 6 core ragas that I was playing, I would put something down, and a couple of years later, get back into it and hear so much more. I mean, it seemed like an unending dive into the depth of things. I mean, one wonderful anecdote is that we were playing Bhairav, and I'm following my guru, Gurgashwami, and he plays the Komal Re, the flat second in the scale, and he looks up at me and says, "This note is very peculiar." And I, at that time, a totally Western conceptual mind goes, "Oh yeah, of course," like that, and just let it go at that. I think it was 20 years later that I was playing Bhairav, and I played that Komal Re in a certain way, and I immediately saw him saying to me, "That note is very peculiar." It was like, wow, yeah, it is. But I couldn't quite tell you how it's peculiar, but yeah, that's it. What you just did, that's it. And that kind of thing is just such a invigorating moment. And I still have the moments like that.
Yeah.
I have them with certain ragas where I feel that years and years later, I'm playing and I go, wow, that's it with that note. That with the way these two notes are combined, how this combination, there's I've been involved with Buddhism for a long time, and in Tibetan Buddhism, we explore what's called the outer, inner, and the sacred, or you could say secret elements of teachings. And you could say that the outer element of raga is I'm playing Rag Bhairav, and here are the notes. And the inner is to really hear the integration of those notes, how they're capsulized in a beautiful composition, for example. But that secret or self-secret aspect is that third one of all of a sudden the essence of a note which just stops time and space, which you can't snap your finger and have it happen. You can't figure it out and say, do this and you'll get that. But it just arises. It arises out of the state of mind, some kind of present moment. And that's what, and of course for the Indian music listeners, the rasikas, the people that know the music, this is what always gets them, vah vah, kya baat hai. Well, what just happened? Well, but And those are the things that I think over the course of all these years, I'm more and more just in love with, entranced by, curious about.
Yeah, I totally relate and just love this depth and this side of the music in the sense. And, there's a saying like one rag is all you need. And the way I interpret that is that one rag is totally infinite and you can never it's not like a finished piece, right? Your whole life, like we talked about, you can be finding new phrases and new places to move. And then the other thing that I've interpreted that as is that if you really study one rag in great detail, then you have more access and understanding to other ones. And that's kind of been something I've interpreted from that saying. And also, like the old days, there were guys that were famous for just like one rag, hear him sing Purya Dinashari. And it's just, I just love getting to communicate about this depth of the music.
This is totally true. Yeah. The idea that one raga, in a way, you if you study one raga in depth, you're learning the footprint, how raga unfolds, how a raga unfolds, and then it is applicable to other ones with their own scales and their own motifs. Certainly, yeah, and that sense that you might have a what'd you say, like a handle on it, or a sense of where the energy is really flowing, and then at another moment you might feel you can't find it. There's a wonderful story that Samir Chatterjee, great tabla player and dear friend of mine, told me. He was playing quite often with the late great Pandit Jasraj, and he was in the green room with Jasraj-ji before an evening concert, and Jasraj-ji says to Samir Da, what shall I play tonight? What shall I sing tonight? What shall I sing? And Samirji says, sing Rag Yaman. And Jasraj, having sung for 60, 70 years, with Yaman, as you know, is like a bulwark of the repertoire, he looks at Samirji and says, I don't have a grip on Yaman at this moment.
Wow.
It's like, wow.
Yeah. There's some perspective, yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. Well, we're talking about raga and kind of this depth, and every raga has a time of day or season for our listeners here. And, as I've learned, my teachers haven't really explained that science, but they affirm it and they stand by it. And I've done some of my own research on the prahars, which are these 8 divisions of the day, and a way that kind of ascribes a rag to its time of day. But when I look at that in the system, there are always some discrepancies and things, and I feel that there's something more intuitive going on behind all of this that really is something almost intangible that is realized on a whole other level than even the scientific explanations, and I'm just curious kind of how you feel about ragas and their connections with time of day, and how that was taught to you, and what it feels like to you.
Yeah, that's a wonderful topic to explore. I think my approach to it is really that this music, Indian classical music, which is something that evolved out of what we know as Nada Yoga, the yoga of sound. It's a music which comes from a culture that was completely connected with nature. It was really in tune with nature, in tune with the quality of light of different times of day, in tune with the rainy season. So that music became a vehicle to connect with a different time of day. And of course, if we think about living in a climate like India, where indoor-outdoor is a lot more fluid than in North America. Certainly where I live, or when we use electric lights at night, if it's sunset, there's nothing other than the natural world. Your connection to that sunset, to the sunset's a beautiful example because on the equator, as I think most people know, sunset occurs much faster than it does in the hemispheres further away from the equator, both in north and south. So twilight in India is this rush of colors. It's this rush of colors. It's this bardo, it's this in-between space between light and dark, or dark and light. It's the experience of if you take a nap and wake up during that time for a split second, you don't know. Is it getting lighter? Is it getting darker? And what do they do with the music? You have a raga like Marwa or Shri. You have these ragas that are unstable, have some kind of floating quality. They're not clearly black or white, this or that. They're this in-between state. I mean, that's the perfect example of where music evolved, which reflected this state in the natural world. So I embrace it from that point of view, and it kind of just comes about intuitively. I sit in the morning, I play Rag Bhairav. I mean, that happens to be my way of beginning my morning, or Bairagi, So I try to really, I wouldn't say try, I just sort of intuitively go along with the game plan. Late afternoon, if I sit down and play my flute, particularly if I'm outdoors, I have this beautiful outdoor space to play where I look over a river. And the trees reflect in the water. And something about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, Madhavanti, Madhukans, Bimplashri, they just seem right. They just seem right to me. Earlier in the morning, Todi. It just, so I'm really kind of embracing this tradition. And I've had different gurus talk about it, but I think I'm more influenced personally with my sense of a Buddhist sense of sort of sacred world and presence.
Beautiful. Yeah, I feel that there's something kind of deeply intuitive there, and it's nice to talk about that with other musicians that are engaged in this music. And
yeah,
thank you for sharing that. Wow.
It's wonderful to play Lalit at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. I've had fabulous opportunities in India to play at all-night festivals and play at that time, or to hear people sing that. When I was in India, the great Amir Khan Sahib was alive, and he was famous for his Lalit at 4:30, and you'd be at these all-night concerts, which is another thing that's interesting, because the sense of staying up all night to hear music and hearing music at a time of day when it really is to be played is like it's a meditative experience. It's a sense of being, falling asleep, nodding out or something like that, and then waking up into this world. And to hear him sing that music at that time is just remarkable.
Yeah. Now, as you became more immersed in the study of Bansuri and you're learning more, what were your first steps of entering the performing world as a Hindustani Bansuri player like? Where did you kind of find your way to begin expressing this music on the stage?
I would say, looking back, that I was tremendously just stepping forward rather clueless. I got a lot of encouragement from people to play. And I think it was perhaps because, and I think a lot of this came from the jazz background I had, that there was something about just sort of, like I could catch the vibe of a raga. I really did not know all that much when I found myself playing. And I can think of certain circumstances where I'm almost embarrassed that I was playing before people. But for the most part, I got a lot of encouragement from Indian listeners, both in India and in the States. And then particularly, I guess, starting in the 90s, so I've been playing 20 years, I started going to India quite frequently for usually from a month to 6 weeks every winter. And with the support of a number of Indian musicians and music critics, got invited to play in these festivals and play concerts for people. And I think a lot of it was that a lot of those people that were supportive were just very pleased that someone from the West, someone from the kind of land of milk and honey, wanted to come to India and study this music seriously, and there was just tremendous appreciation for that. So that was kind of an entryway that led me into it. I've never been under I'm aware when I hear some people that are in their 20s how much they know and how much more there is to learn and what I don't know. I'm really aware of all of that, But at this point, I kind of feel that I can show up and play something. I can play it from my heart. I can play it from my heart, and this is the way I play it. And I know I know it's still connected to a tradition. And yet, a lot of people would say, "Oh, I can really hear the jazz in your playing." It's, the depth of there's no end to it. What one could study and take further.
So when you were, you're hearing Coltrane and probably guys like Pharoah Sanders and this kind of more free India influenced jazz, and did that shift your idea of what music could be, or what you thought it was, or did you sense that devotion as much as before you kind of stepped into Hindustani tradition and study? Do you feel like you were really seeing that that spark of what we were talking about as kind of these intangible parts of a raga? Was that something that you felt from Coltrane's improvisations, and how do those two relate?
It's kind of interesting. I'm not sure I really thought about it that much. I think what I began to realize was that the jazz music that I loved, which was predominantly the voice of these African American musicians, it wasn't my music. I played it, but it just wasn't my music. It was as simple as that. I listened to Eric Dolphy. I really know that era of jazz very, very well. And I love listening to people who really play it thoroughly. But for some reason, I stumbled onto something in India that I felt was more true to who I was, or who I am. And as much as I can hold on to that, the more honest things are. I'm actually playing a little program this weekend. It's been wonderful to have these outdoor events where people can actually come. And I'm playing with a fine jazz guitar player and drummer, and it's kind of a jazz setting. And I was just telling a friend earlier today that for me, my task when I'm in that situation is to not get drawn into trying to play like a jazz player, because that's not what I do well. But to find a way to bring into that music this voice that's coming from Indian music.
Wow.
And sometimes that's a challenge, because it's very easy to get kind of swept into, all of a sudden I'm just going, and that's not what I should be doing.
Wow. So when you found Raga music and Hindustani music, did you kind of ease off on, practicing jazz music as much?
Oh, totally.
Okay.
Totally. No, I've never.
You went really full back. You were full in.
Oh yeah.
You went,
yeah. And I've had some wonderful opportunities to play with people that are, just masters in the jazz world. I played with Jack DeJohnette.
Yeah.
Greatest jazz drummer alive, for 2 years. But again, my role and my task, and where I succeeded and also where I couldn't quite succeed, was in bringing to him something that was of this authentic Indian world music aesthetic. And I can hear where it worked, and I can hear where it fell short, because I couldn't find that voice in certain situations, And it's an ongoing thing, and I'm interested in that. I'm very interested in that. It's been an important part of the musical opportunities I've found myself in, to be able to work with that. I'm certainly not exclusively playing Indian classical music by any means.
And a question I've been asking, this term world music,
yeah,
what does that mean to you? How do you interpret the term world music? What does it mean to you?
That's funny. There was a joke a number of years ago that somebody asked somebody in Ethiopia, what's world music? And they said, James Brown. So, it's a very loose genre, but I think that it is the expansion that took place most recently, starting in the 60s and 70s, where we incorporated music other than the European and African American tradition as it was with jazz. And began to really explore other musics, and in a way, from a Eurocentric perspective, like with Western classical music, there were a number of bursts of world music. Beethoven was the first musician to use Turkish cymbals, Turkish music. Debussy heard gamelan at the Paris World's Fair in the 1890s, and that totally became a palette, a tapestry of his. So there are numerous times that this has really happened. The big difference was that in the 60s we had recordings. We had wonderful anthologies by None Such Recordings and the UNESCO series of music from all over the world. And both Western classical composers and jazz musicians who heard those couldn't help but be influenced by it. And that led to the first you could say explorations with this. And things, the success is almost that's irrelevant. You step out and try something, it might not work, but the gates opened. The world is multicultural. It's rich with all these things, and at the same time, I can hear the voice of a lot of people that would say, well, Indian classical music is kind of like a pure form. And if you begin to mess with it, you're just going to dilute that secret, sacred element. And I can hear the truth in that as well. So I think the two kind of exist side by side. There's situations where you can explore something, you can stretch out. A lot of what's in the so-called New Age genre is using Indian music in a kind of soft Bud Light kind of way.
Yeah.
And some of it is quite beautiful. Some of it is quite beautiful. Who's to say? But there is also a truth that a raga, cradling a classical raga, is unique. And when it's watered down, when chords are added to it, all kinds of things that we've heard, it just ain't the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that.
Yeah. So you're on tour and you've got a performance and you only have a half hour to practice. What would you practice? What do you play when you have that limited time? And
I would reframe it and say, you've spent the last 2 hours arranging the stage and the sounds and schlepping the sound system, and there's a cable that doesn't work, and you're trying to, and you hate the sound that you're getting, and then you have to play. What do you play? I think that's more an experience I can really relate to. At best, you take a deep breath and center yourself in a contemplative state, and in a way embrace the Dharmakaya, the emptiness, and that sound is something's going to arise from that. And I think that I can recall often an experience where I'll start playing and I'll feel, oh my God, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. I'm not, and I think the most important thing to do is not jump. Not jump and try to, and you hear this in a lot of people's music where they just they're afraid they're going to lose your attention and they start flailing around right away, rather than just holding steady and believing that, trusting that something will come out of that steadiness, and that'll be the real thing, rather than, I just started prancing around and running through hoops.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the challenging parts of performing.
I mean, I'm a little jealous of you guys who can spend a fair amount of time tuning. You can spend 10 minutes. Sometimes the audience goes, "Come on already!" But your tuning is more than tuning the instrument. You're tuning your mind as well. And this is very different with the flute, where if you haven't had a chance to really play in the green room, you've got to really either find it on the spot or be willing to be patient with finding it.
That gives me a broader perspective of the tuning. I appreciate that. I'm going to see that as an opportunity now. Wow. Well, we're always jealous of the travel-friendly qualities of a flute, but I guess everybody's got their up and down with their chosen instrument.
Right.
Well, the world's going through a lot right now, and, we're in interesting times. And I'm just, maybe for our listeners, if you can share, what is really the role and potential of music right now for people, and for even maybe for your own self? And I'm assuming that a lot of tours and performances have been canceled, and you are still accessing music. And how can you kind of share some of that inspiration with the broader world and our listeners?
I believe that music, and I would say the arts in general, are vital, absolutely vital to the well-being of us all and to this fragile planet that we live on. And that music has the possibility of individually synchronizing our mind and our heart, our mind and our body, and on a social level, offering something which cuts the aggression of speediness, a sense of what's going to happen next. Music has that ability to allow you to rest in your true nature. And that true nature is not the world of hope and fear. It gives us a moment of sanity. And so much of the energy that we're being bombarded with, I mean, we saw the man who is leading this country politically just ranting like a spoiled child. Anything that I feel that if I have a goal, if I have a desire, if I have a mission, it's to play music which allows people to just breathe, feel their own goodness, and be able to extend that goodness out to others. Feel that we are more connected than we are different. The great composer and conductor Lenny Bernstein made a comment during World War II where he said that our response to violence will be to play music more passionately, more honestly, and with more integrity than ever. And that these things actually do work. They really work on people. I've had the satisfaction of knowing it on a personal level when someone will just say, wow, you played something and I just stopped it stopped my fear, it stopped my anxiety. It allowed me to just breathe and feel the warmth of this day, whatever. So that's my aspiration with music.
Well, it's been just such a pleasure, Steve, going into such deep topics about music and life, and I feel kind of a breath of inspiration here as with your final thoughts. And I'd love to share with our listeners how they can find more of your music and your work.
I have a website, stevegorn.com, and on the website there are actually there's quite a few video clips that you can just click on and hear a variety of things. Some Indian classical music. It's rather old, actually. I've been lazy about updating that. But it also includes a number of interesting things in this world music genre. And then there are some CDs, those relics of another era, that are available. Quite a few of them, I think, online, and there are some physical copies around.
Is there a project that you are currently working on that we can look forward to?
I've got a talk. I've got a talk on my website which people might find interesting. It's called The Transformative Power of Music, and it's an abbreviated version of a talk I've been giving at universities for the last 10 or so years, where I really explore this notion that I mentioned before of the power of music, what music is as a vehicle for transformation on the personal and on the social level. And it's about a 20-minute piece where I speak about that for a bit and then talk about how that works for me when I play.
Yeah, I watched that one, and I recommend that to any listener who wants to kind of hear more about some of the things we talked about. This power of a raga. What is it? What's really happening? And Steve kind of demonstrates as he's playing his Bansuri different qualities of how a raga unfolds, and just music in a broader context of what it's here to serve and do. So. Wow. Well, I just thank you for your sharing and your devotion to music. Enjoy that beautiful fall day there. And I hope one day we can sit with instruments again.
I know. We only had that brief minute there at Omega, at Bhakti Fest.
Yes, yeah. God willing. And it's been nice I've been connecting with artists in this kind of interview format, and it's different than, I miss sitting with my instrument, but this is just a very satisfying way to keep that inspiration and connection. So I'm grateful just for all the great artists and musicians out there who are continuing to spread light with their work in the world. And Steve, it's been awesome having you.
Well, thank you, Will. Thank you so much for doing this, not only with me, but for really offering a whole series of these to people. Because in a way, I've always felt like a dialogue, conversational approach really allows someone to speak, reflect on what's going on, and then the questions really keep things moving nicely. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you once again for tuning in. Your support is much appreciated. Please consider taking just a moment to write a review and to like and subscribe to the World Music Podcast. It'll really help us reach more listeners. And I'd like to take a moment to share one of my offerings. In this past year, I've created an online course that is called Raga for All Instruments. And the vision of this course is to share the beauty of raga music from the Hindustani tradition with musicians who maybe come from a different background and want to go deeper into these amazing raga melodies. This course is taught in the key of C, and it's aimed really for any musician on any instrument or vocalist with a desire to have a deeper understanding of this amazing music. You can find more about this course by visiting my website, willmarshmusic.com. You'll see the link there for the online course. And bear in mind that the first 4 videos of the course are free, so you can go ahead and dive in and check them out and start your journey into raga music. Thank you so much, and see you on the next episode.